27 years after the nameless woman was buried, Lena Hart found her alive on a strip of silent film. The frame showed the woman turning toward the camera inside Meridian Station, 3 days after police records said she had died. Lena stopped the projector, but the machine kept clicking in the dark. Someone had cut one frame from the reel, and the missing image sat where the woman should have revealed who was beside her. Lena worked alone in the basement of the Northbridge Archive, restoring damaged evidence for cold cases no one expected to reopen. The film had come from an unlabeled red suitcase, sealed since 1999. Its inventory listed burned clothes, foreign coins, 2 wigs, and a hotel key. It did not mention any film. The suitcase should have been empty, which meant someone had returned to it after the case was officially closed. The dead woman had been found beside an abandoned service road outside the city, dressed in a gray coat with every label removed. No identification survived the fire that blackened the ground around her. Police called her Jane 17 because she was the 17th unidentified body entered that year. The name was practical, but Lena hated it. It made a person sound like a drawer in a cabinet. Lena knew the case because her father, Emil Hart, had been the last station clerk to speak with the woman. He had described her as calm, well-dressed, and afraid of being recognized. 2 months after giving his statement, Emil quit the railway and never discussed the night again. Lena had spent her childhood watching him wake at the sound of camera shutters, even when no camera was in the room. The restored film contained 4 scenes. In the first, the woman crossed the station concourse carrying the red suitcase. In the second, she entered the Bellwether Hotel under another name. In the third, she stood beside the service road, where her body would later be found. The fourth scene had been almost destroyed. Each scene ended with the same gesture. She looked past the camera and quietly said something the silent film could not record. Lena enlarged the woman's mouth, frame by frame. The movement was short and repeated with unusual precision. After 3 hours, she wrote the likely words on a pad. "Do not call me Evelyn." It was not proof, only a reading of lips, but the name matched one of 7 aliases in the old file. Someone had known which identity frightened her, and someone behind the camera had used it deliberately. The film stock was manufactured 12 years after Jane 17's death. That fact should have made the footage impossible. Lena checked the edge code twice, then called the archive technician to verify it without explaining why. The answer remained the same. Either the film had been copied later, or the date of the woman's death had been wrong. Both possibilities meant the official case file had been altered by someone with access. Lena opened the evidence log and found the red suitcase listed under 3 different storage numbers. The first entry ended on the night of the autopsy. The second appeared 9 years later, signed only with initials. The third was created the week her father retired. None recorded the film reels. A thin smear of darkroom chemical stained the newest page, carrying the sharp metallic smell Lena remembered from Emil's locked workshop. At dawn, Lena drove to Emil's small house with a digital copy of the first scene. He watched the woman cross Meridian Station without blinking. When the projector click sounded through Lena's laptop, his right hand closed around the table edge. He denied recognizing the film, but before Lena mentioned the suitcase, he asked whether the red case had finally been opened. The question exposed a memory he had hidden for decades. Emil said the woman had arrived on the last train with no ticket and no luggage. That contradicted both his original statement and the film, which showed the red suitcase in her hand. He claimed age had blurred the details, then corrected the station clock visible behind her, without being asked. The film showed 10:18. Emil whispered that it had actually been 10:23, because the clock had run 5 minutes slow for years. Lena asked why the woman feared the name Evelyn. Emil turned away and opened a kitchen drawer filled with old railway tokens. Beneath them lay a hotel matchbook from the Bellwether. Inside the cover, someone had written, "If he calls me Evelyn, leave without me." Emil said he had never seen the sentence before. His thumb, however, rested over the handwriting as if he knew exactly where the final word ended. Before Lena could press him further, Emil burned the matchbook over the sink. The flame reached his fingers, but he did not let go until the writing curled into ash. He told Lena the nameless woman had ruined enough lives, and ordered her to return the film to storage. Lena saw fear in him, but not fear for himself. He was protecting someone whose name had never appeared in the public case. Back at the archive, Lena reviewed the autopsy photographs instead of the official summary. The woman wore a narrow silver ring on her left hand, yet the evidence inventory described no jewelry. In the film, the same ring caught the station light whenever she gripped the suitcase. One photograph showed a pale band of skin after the ring had been removed. Someone had taken it between the scene examination and the evidence count. The old case detective, Mara Venn, had died 6 years earlier, but her private notes remained boxed in the archive. Lena found one sentence underlined twice. She was not hiding her face, she was hiding the person who knew it. Mara had also sketched the red suitcase with a small square missing from its lining. The sketch suggested a concealed pocket, though no later search report mentioned one. Lena returned to the suitcase and peeled back the brittle lining. A flat compartment opened beneath the baseboard. Inside sat a single undeveloped photograph wrapped in wax paper. The image was badly fogged, but two silhouettes stood near the station clock. One was the woman, the second wore a railway uniform like Emil's. A third shape, visible only as a shadow. The photograph changed the central question. Lena no longer needed to ask whether Emil had met the woman. She needed to know why he had erased himself from the story, and who had photographed them both. The camera angle matched the silent film, suggesting one observer followed the woman from the station to the hotel and finally to the service road. The same person may have controlled which images survived. Lena searched the Bellwether Hotel register and found the alias Evelyn Rowe, written on 3 separate nights. Each entry used different handwriting, but all listed the same room, 314. The final entry was dated 2 days after the body was discovered. Room 314 had been closed for plumbing repairs that entire month. Someone had signed the dead woman's name in a room no guest could enter. A surviving note porter remembered that room because police never interviewed him. He said a woman matching Jane 17 had asked for an envelope, not a key. She carried no suitcase, but a man in a railway coat waited across the lobby. The porter heard a camera shutter from the stairwell. Then, the woman looked toward the sound and said clearly, "Do not call me Evelyn." The porter also remembered the envelope. It was thick, sealed with gray wax, and addressed to Mara Venn, the detective who would later lead the case. He saw the woman hand it to the man in the railway coat. The envelope never appeared in evidence. If Emil had received it, he had withheld material before the death was even reported. If another railway worker had taken it, Emil had protected the wrong man. Lena returned to Emil's house that evening and placed the fogged photograph before him. He studied the shadow behind the camera, then admitted the uniformed figure was not him. It was a borrowed coat, one he had lent the woman so she could leave the station unseen. Emil had taken the photograph himself. The third shadow belonged to someone standing directly behind him. Emil refused to name the shadow. He said only that Jane 17 had arrived with a plan to disappear, then changed her mind after seeing who was waiting at the station. She gave Emil the envelope and made him promise to deliver it if she failed to return by morning. He broke that promise. Before Lena could ask why, Emil said the envelope had contained the woman's real name. Emil led Lena to his locked workshop, where an old enlarger stood beneath a dust sheet. On the wall hung dozens of blank photographic papers, all yellowed with age. He removed one sheet and revealed a hidden safe. Inside was the gray wax envelope, still sealed, beside the missing silver ring. Lena understood that opening it might identify the dead woman. Emil warned that it would also expose the last person who had loved her. Lena did not break the seal. She photographed the envelope, the ring, and the safe exactly as she found them. Emil insisted the name inside would not simply identify the dead woman. It would identify the person who arranged her false passports, and the detective who agreed to hide them. He said one of those people might still be alive, and the other had already been buried with a lie. Under angled light, Lena saw writing pressed into the envelope, from a page that had once rested above it. Most letters were unreadable, but 3 words survived. Room 314, midnight. A fourth mark looked like a date, 2 days before the body was found. Emil admitted the woman had asked him to bring the envelope there, but he had gone to the station instead, after hearing a camera shutter outside his window. The silver ring carried no initials, only a shallow groove around its inner edge. Lena cleaned it with a soft brush and found traces of gray wax inside the groove. The ring had been used to seal the envelope. That meant it belonged to the woman, or to the person who controlled her documents. Emile said she removed it at the station because anyone who saw it would know which name she was using. Lena compared the seal with the marks on the bellwether register. Several false signatures ended with the same small oval, pressed into wet ink, as though the writer had worn the ring while signing. Evelyn Rowe was not merely an alias. It was a complete identity, repeated with the same room, the same seal, and the same fear. Someone had trained the woman to inhabit it whenever she entered the hotel. In Mara Ven's notes, Lena found a contact sheet from a roll never listed as evidence. 6 tiny images showed room 314 from the hallway. The woman entered alone at 11:52. Emile arrived 7 minutes later, carrying the red suitcase. At 12:06, a third figure opened the door from inside. The final image had been cut away, leaving a white rectangle where the person's face should have been. Emile denied ever entering the room. He said he left the suitcase outside and heard the woman arguing with a man beyond the door. The man called her Evelyn. She answered, "Do not call me by that name," then accused him of selling dead people's histories to living clients. Emile heard a camera shutter, a blow against the wall, and the lock turning. He fled before the corridor lights came on. The bellwether had closed years earlier, but its plans remained in the city archive. Room 314 shared a service wall with a narrow photographic studio, once used for guest portraits and passport pictures. The studio had no public entrance. It could be reached only through the hotel office or a concealed panel inside the room. The camera operator could have watched every meeting without appearing in the hallway photographs. A renovation report mentioned chemical damage behind the service wall, and a square section of flooring replaced after the woman's death. The report was signed by the hotel owner, Oscar Vale. His name appeared nowhere in the police file, though Mara had circled the initials OV beside 3 missing evidence entries. Lena now had a possible organizer, but no proof that Vale had killed anyone or even remained at the hotel that night. Lena and Emile entered the abandoned bellwether through a side door opened by the property caretaker. Dust covered the lobby, but the old wall clock still hung above the desk. Its hands were stopped at 10:23, the same corrected time Emile had whispered while watching the film. He claimed the clock had been moved from Meridian Station after the hotel closed. Lena wondered who had preserved such a precise reminder. On the 3rd floor, room 314 smelled faintly of damp plaster and old developer fluid. The wallpaper beside the wardrobe had been patched with a different pattern. When Lena pressed the seam, a panel shifted inward. Somewhere behind the wall, a spring released with the clean click of a camera shutter. Emile froze. The sound had haunted him for decades, but here it came from a mechanical trigger, not an unseen observer. The hidden studio contained an enlarger, a fixed camera, and shelves of numbered envelopes. Most were empty. One still held passport portraits of the nameless woman wearing 3 wigs and 3 expressions. In every image, the silver ring appeared on a different finger. The photographs were not records of disguises chosen freely. They were instructions, showing how she had to look whenever Oscar Vale assigned her another identity. Beneath the enlarger, Lena found a ledger page listing hotel rooms, dates, and pairs of initials. It did not describe crimes or clients, but it recorded payments for photographs, signatures, and personal histories. Evelyn Rowe appeared beside room 314 7 times. The final entry contained no payment. Instead, it carried one word: returned. Lena could not tell whether the word referred to the woman, the red suitcase, or a stolen identity. A damaged negative in the fixed camera showed 3 people inside the studio. The woman faced Oscar Vale, whose portrait Lena recognized from hotel records. Emile stood near the hidden panel with the suitcase. The frame made him look like an accomplice. When Lena projected it onto the wall, Emile admitted he had lied again. He had entered the studio, but only after the woman screamed his name from behind the door. The next negative showed Emile holding Vale against the wall, while the woman searched the desk. A third showed her lifting a small book from a drawer. The sequence ended before anyone left. Lena suspected Emile had helped steal the identity ledger, then concealed it inside the red suitcase. If so, he had possessed the strongest motive to remove the ring, hide the envelope, and erase his presence from the investigation. Lena accused him in the empty room. Emil did not defend himself. He said the woman had promised the ledger would expose Vale without destroying the people whose stolen histories had been used. Emil agreed to help her escape, but when she demanded the envelope back, he refused. He believed Mara Venn could protect the evidence. His mistake was trusting that the detective would arrive before Vale found the service road. Emil finally explained the red suitcase. It had contained the ledger, 2 wigs, and enough clothing to make the woman appear to leave Northbridge under different names. He carried it to the station while she drew Vale toward the hotel. The plan failed when Vale recognized the ring and called her Evelyn. That name was a warning. It meant her current identity had been compromised, and every route connected to it was being watched. The phrase was not a plea to preserve her dignity. It was an instruction to abandon the plan. Each time the woman said, "Do not call me Evelyn," she was telling Emil that Vale had identified the alias and that the next meeting place was unsafe. Emil ignored the warning at the station because he believed he could still save her. His choice placed the suitcase, the ledger, and the woman on the same road. Lena searched the hidden shelves for the missing ledger, but found only a strip of film wrapped around a hotel key. The key belonged to room 314. When she held the film to the light, she saw the missing final image from Mara's contact sheet. It showed Oscar Vale leaving the room alone with a small book under his coat. The woman and Emil remained inside, meaning Vale had recovered the ledger before the death. The recovered frame weakened the case against Emil, but it raised another problem. Vale had left the hotel before midnight, while the service road fire began nearly 3 hours later. Lena checked Mara's notes and found a line she had overlooked. Subject requested transport after confrontation. Refused police vehicle. The woman had survived the hotel meeting. Someone else had driven her away, and Mara had known she was alive after Vale departed. Inside the hotel key's paper sleeve, Lena found a faint fingerprint preserved beneath dried wax. The archive database matched it to Mara Venn. The detective had handled the key before it entered evidence, yet her official report claimed room 314 was never searched. For the first time, Lena considered that Mara had not merely concealed mistakes. She may have helped the woman continue using false names after the supposed time of death. Emil said Mara arrived at the station just before dawn, alone and without the woman. She took the rent suitcase, removed the ledger, and returned the empty case to him. Then she ordered him to say the woman had boarded a train. Emil refused because he had seen blood on Mara's sleeve. Mara answered that the blood was not hers, and that the woman would die if anyone learned she had survived the night. Lena returned to the archive and examined the bellwether register under ultraviolet light. The entry, dated 2 days after the body was found, had been written over an erased name. Beneath Evelyn Rowe, another identity emerged in Mara's handwriting. The surname matched no person in the case file, but the address belonged to a coastal clinic that treated severe burns. Someone had registered the dead woman there after her funeral had already been arranged. The coastal clinic had closed after a storm damaged its foundations, but patient ledgers survived in municipal storage. Lena found the erased surname beside a woman admitted with burns, smoke inhalation, and no identification. The admission time was 4:10 in the morning, less than an hour after the service road fire. The patient was discharged under guard 2 days later. No destination was listed, and the signature belonged to Mara Venn. A retired nurse remembered the patient because she never spoke above a whisper. Her face was bandaged, but her hands were uninjured, and she kept turning a silver ring that was no longer on her finger. Whenever staff called her Evelyn, she became agitated and asked for Emil. The nurse assumed Emil was her husband. Mara corrected her once, saying, "He is the reason she is still alive." The nurse also remembered a red suitcase delivered near dawn. Mara opened it in the treatment room and removed a book, several photographs, and a gray wax envelope. The patient demanded the envelope, but Mara refused. A camera shutter sounded outside the frosted window minutes later. By the time security reached the corridor, whoever had been watching was gone, leaving only a square flash mark on the glass. Lena asked whether the clinic patient could have been someone else. The nurse described a narrow scar along the woman's right wrist, shaped like a hook. The autopsy photographs showed the same scar on Jane 17. If both records were genuine, the woman had been alive after the body was found. That forced a disturbing possibility. Either the corpse had been misidentified, or the clinic ledger had been created to manufacture a survivor. The autopsy file offered an answer that seemed decisive. Dental charts matched the dead woman to X-rays recovered from a suitcase pocket, and the wrist scar appeared in both sets of photographs. Lena initially concluded that the clinic record was false. Mara must have invented a surviving patient to frighten Vale or conceal where the ledger had gone. It was the simplest explanation, and for several hours Lena believed it. Then Lena noticed the dental X-rays carried no hospital stamp, patient number, or date. They had been photographed against a hotel towel, not produced by a clinic. The red suitcase had supplied the comparison records used to identify the body. Whoever packed it could have chosen any woman's X-rays and placed them beside Jane 17's belongings. The official match proved only that the suitcase and the corpse had been made to agree. Emil said the woman kept several medical records because each alias required a believable history. Vale sold complete identities, not simple passports. A client received photographs, signatures, childhood details, and old injuries copied from real people. Evelyn Rowe had belonged to a woman who died years earlier. The nameless woman wore that identity so often that even her scars and dental work had been documented under someone else's name. This created Lena's first working hypothesis. Mara had found the woman injured, placed another burned body at the service road, and used Vale's false records to make the substitution convincing. The woman then recovered at the clinic and disappeared under a final identity. Emil's hidden envelope contained that identity, while the silent film was created later to preserve her route in case someone tried to erase her again. The hypothesis explained the clinic, the altered evidence log, and the film stock. It also made Mara appear less corrupt and more desperate. Yet one detail resisted it. The service road corpse had been found wearing the silver ring, according to the first crime scene photograph. The same ring later rested in Emil's safe. Unless two identical rings existed, someone had removed it from the body and returned it to him after the autopsy. Lena searched the evidence transfer sheets and found a receipt signed by a morgue attendant. The ring had been released to next of kin 3 days after the body was found, even though the woman had no known relatives. The recipient used Emil's address and a forged version of his signature. A witness had claimed the dead woman before police even decided what name to place on her grave. The morgue attendant was dead, but his daughter had preserved a box of his notebooks. One entry described a woman in a veil collecting the ring and asking whether the body's hands had been photographed before cleaning. The attendant wrote that her voice sounded injured and familiar. He added one sentence in the margin. She thanked me for keeping her death private. Emil recognized the phrasing but not the handwriting. The nameless woman often thanked people as if they had already agreed to help her. He believed she had collected the ring herself after leaving the clinic. Lena wanted to accept that answer. It meant the woman had survived and chosen disappearance. But the attendant's note also said she walked without pain, while the clinic record described burns severe enough to prevent travel. The retired nurse then admitted Mara had instructed staff to exaggerate the patient's injuries. The woman suffered smoke exposure and a cut across her shoulder, but the facial bandages were unnecessary. They concealed her from a man who arrived with police credentials and asked to photograph every burn victim. The nurse never saw his face clearly. She remembered only the deliberate click of his camera before Mara forced him outside. Lena compared the clinic's visitor log with Oscar Vale's known movements. Vale had been questioned at Northbridge Police Headquarters that same morning, making him an unlikely visitor. The signature belonged to an investigator named Paul Rusk, but no officer by that name existed. Mara had underlined the same initials in her notes and written, "He does not work for us." The photographer was now separate from Vale, though his purpose remained unclear. This threatened to widen the case into another conspiracy, so Lena returned to what the evidence could prove. One man had photographed the woman at the station, hotel, clinic, and service road. He used false credentials and removed selected frames. Whether Vale employed him mattered less than the pattern. He documented each identity change and intervened whenever she tried to leave the system. The camera was not surveillance alone, it was control. A chemical test on the missing frame showed the film had been developed in Emil's workshop, not Mara's police lab. Emil finally admitted Mara brought him 4 damaged reels after the clinic discharge. She asked him to copy them onto newer film and cut away every image that revealed the photographer. She claimed the man would kill for his anonymity. Emil obeyed, then hid one uncut frame inside the hotel key. Lena accused Emil of protecting the very person who hunted the woman. Emil answered that Mara's request had been more specific. Remove the photographer's face until the woman reached safety. Then deliver the uncut reel to her. Emil waited for instructions that never came. Months later, Mara told him the woman was dead for real, and that releasing the image would endanger someone innocent. He believed her because she carried the silver ring. The uncut frame inside the hotel key showed only veil, leaving room 314. Lena needed the missing face from the clinic or station reels. She examined the blank photographic papers in Emil's workshop and found faint silver residue beneath one sheet. A concealed contact print emerged under restoration light. It showed Mara beside the clinic window, confronting the photographer. His face remained outside the frame, but his left hand held the gray wax envelope. The envelope in Emil's safe could not be the same one, unless Mara recovered it later. Its seal was unbroken, yet the contact print showed the photographer holding something with the same ring impression. Lena inspected the wax under magnification and found a thin cut around its edge. The seal had been lifted, opened, and carefully reset. Whatever name lay inside was no longer secret to the person behind the camera. Emil admitted he had never checked the seal because preserving the woman's trust mattered more than satisfying his fear. Lena saw the cost of that choice. For 27 years, he had guarded an envelope that might contain a warning already read by the enemy. She prepared to open it, but a loose strip of film fell from the safe door. 3 frames showed the woman leaving the clinic alone before sunrise. In the first frame, she carried no luggage. In the second, she turned toward the camera and formed the familiar words, "Do not call me Evelyn." In the third, she raised the silver ring toward the lens, then pointed behind the photographer. A blurred figure stood across the road, wearing Mara's coat. The sequence suggested the warning was no longer directed at Emil. It was meant for the person filming her. Lena enlarged the final frame until the grain nearly dissolved. The figure in Mara's coat held the red suitcase, but one detail was wrong. Mara had lost 2 fingers on her right hand years earlier, while this figure gripped the handle with all 5. Someone had borrowed her coat, just as the woman had borrowed Emil's railway uniform. The investigation's strongest visual clue had become a disguise, and the first hypothesis began to collapse. Lena examined the clinic frames beside the original negatives and found a second line of sprocket marks. The image of the figure in Mara's coat had been added during duplication. Its grain, contrast, and edge damage belonged to another roll entirely. The person with 5 fingers had never stood across the road. Someone had inserted the false witness 12 years later, inside Emil's workshop, when the surviving footage was copied. The source image came from a police photograph of Mara leaving the bellwether in that same coat. Her body had been cut from the background and placed behind the woman. The disguise was not meant to imitate Mara perfectly. It was meant to make any future investigator suspect her. Lena realized the silent film was not a neutral record. Parts of it had been assembled to steer whoever found the red suitcase. Emil stopped denying it. Mara had brought him damaged negatives 12 years after the death and ordered him to build 4 short sequences from authentic photographs, reenacted movements, and blank frames. She wanted the route preserved without exposing every person who traveled it. Emil insisted he had not invented the woman's gestures. Each time she formed the warning about Evelyn, the image came from an original negative. The missing frames served a purpose as well. Mara instructed Emil to remove one image wherever the woman had changed plans. A complete scene marked a route that remained safe. A cut scene marked a place where Vale had recognized an alias or intercepted a message. The film was less a record of the past than a map of failed escapes. Lena replayed the 4 scenes in order. The station sequence lost a frame after the clock appeared. The hotel sequence broke after room 314 opened. The service road sequence ended when the red suitcase touched the ground. The final clinic sequence was cut after the silver ring faced the camera. 3 familiar anchors now carried instructions. Time, destination, and the moment and identity had to be abandoned. The repeated sentence also changed meaning. "Do not call me Evelyn" was not simply fear, and it was not addressed to one person. It meant the Evelyn identity had been exposed. Anyone who heard it was supposed to stop using the current route, destroy the related documents, and separate from the suitcase. Emil had failed at the station because he treated the warning as a plea instead of an order. Lena asked who the reconstructed film was meant to guide. Emil said Mara never told him. She only required that the reel remain inside the rent suitcase and that the suitcase return to official storage after his retirement. The instructions assumed someone with archive access would eventually find it. Lena understood with sudden anger that Mara had designed the trail for a future evidence worker, perhaps for Lena herself. A row of needle holes beneath the suitcase lining confirmed that suspicion. When Lena placed tracing paper over them, the pattern matched an archive shelf code rather than stitching. The code led to a sealed box filed under hotel maintenance records. Mara had hidden the next part of the case outside the homicide collection, where anyone searching Jane 17's name would never discover it. The maintenance box contained broken wall panels, chemical invoices, and a supplemental report signed by Mara but never submitted. The first page stated that the service road corpse could not be identified independently of items from the suitcase. Every comparison record had come through Vale's hotel. Mara therefore rejected the official identification before the funeral. But a superior ordered the case closed after the press learned about the false names. Mara's report confirmed that the clinic patient was the woman from Meridian Station. It did not identify the burned body. The report called that victim an unknown woman used to complete a disappearance, and noted that Vale had access to unclaimed remains through a contractor. Lena felt the case grow darker. Saving one woman had required silence about another, and Mara's protection had preserved the injustice she claimed to oppose. The final pages described the woman's choice after leaving the clinic. She refused formal protection because Vale's identity network reached clerks, hotels, and document offices. Not because it was a vast conspiracy, but because he paid ordinary people to overlook small lies. Mara arranged one final departure without papers. Emil provided clothes and money. The woman promised to contact him after 6 months, then vanished without sending a word. Emil admitted why he had obeyed for so long. He had loved her before he knew any of her names. They met whenever she passed through the station, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for an entire night. She never promised to stay. Emil never asked for the truth until the night she begged him to help steal Vale's ledger. His silence protected her, but it also protected his own betrayal of everyone who trusted him. Lena carried the gray wax envelope back to the archive and placed it beneath the document camera. Emil asked her to leave it sealed, arguing that the woman had chosen anonymity after surviving. Lena answered that the unidentified body on the service road had never been given that choice. She broke the lifted wax with a thin blade, deciding that one dead woman's name could not be protected by erasing another. Inside lay a photograph of Emil and the woman, beside the station clock, both younger and openly happy. A folded letter had been wrapped around it. The first line addressed Emil, but the section where the writer signed her name had been cut away with a narrow rectangular blade. The removed strip matched the width of every missing frame. Someone had opened the envelope, taken only the name, and carefully resealed it. The remaining letter explained that Evelyn Rowe was not one identity, but a vacancy Vale assigned whenever he needed a woman to cross a border, rent a room, or carry documents without creating a new history. The nameless woman had used Evelyn for years, then discovered Vale had begun giving the same identity to another courier. 2 living women were being placed inside one dead person's past. She stole the ledger because the second courier had disappeared after receiving Evelyn's ring and medical records. The woman believed Vale intended to replace her permanently, then blame any future crime on the identity they shared. She planned to surrender the ledger to Mara, expose the system, and claim her real name. At the hotel, she learned the second courier was already dead. The body on the service road was likely hers. The letter did not prove Vale caused the second woman's death, but it explained the substitution. He had one corpse linked to Evelyn's records, and one survivor desperate to disappear. Mara used his deception against him, declaring the survivor dead before Vale could hunt her under another name. The plan saved Emile's lover, yet it left the second courier buried beneath an alias that had never truly belonged to either woman. Lena scanned the letter into the archive system before continuing, afraid the fragile paper would not survive another handling. The upload created an access record visible to senior staff. Less than a minute later, the basement lights failed. A camera shutter clicked beyond the locked door. Emile whispered that the sound was real this time. Someone had been waiting for the envelope to enter a searchable record. The door opened before Lena reached the alarm. A masked intruder struck Emile with the metal body of an old camera and swept the envelope, ring, and film reels into the red suitcase. Lena grabbed the handle, but the intruder dragged her across the floor. Emile rose despite the blood on his temple and locked both arms around the attacker. Water burst from the ceiling, flooding the tables and turning loose photographs into black pulp. The intruder released the suitcase long enough to drive Emile against the enlarger. Glass shattered beneath him. Lena had a clear path to chase the attacker, but Emile could not stand, and blood spread under his shoulder. She chose to stay, watching the red suitcase disappear through the stairwell while she pressed her coat against his wound. The decision saved Emile, but the archive lost the envelope, the silver ring, and nearly every surviving reel. The scanned letter had also vanished from the system during the outage. Lena found no backup, only an access log showing that her upload had been opened from Mara Ven's inactive account. Someone had preserved the detective's credentials for years and used them the moment the woman's missing name became searchable. One wet strip of film remained caught inside the projector. After drying it, Lena saw the woman at the clinic opening the gray wax envelope herself. She read the letter, cut away the line containing her name, and resealed the wax with the silver ring. The photographer had not stolen her identity from the envelope. She had removed it willingly, then looked into the lens and pointed toward whoever must carry the secret next. At the hospital, Emile admitted the greatest lie he had left untouched. Mara had not brought the later reels to his workshop alone. 12 years after the fire, the nameless woman returned with her, older, thinner, and alive. She asked Emile to copy the surviving negatives onto new stock. The film's impossible manufacturing date did not prove forgery. It proved she had participated in preserving her own disappearance. Emile said she never entered his house. They worked through one night with the curtains closed, while Mara sorted original photographs into 4 sequences. The woman chose every frame and removed each image that showed a change of plan. When Emile asked what name he should write on the canister, she repeated the warning about Evelyn. This time he understood. The old identity was still dangerous. The reconstructed film was intended for a future investigator, but not to reveal the survivor's name. Its purpose was to prove how Vale built identities, how Mara disrupted the substitution, and how a second woman became the body on the service road. The survivor insisted that her new life remain separate from the evidence. She would expose the mechanism that trapped them both, but not surrender the one identity she had chosen freely. Mara selected the red suitcase because every false record in the case already pointed toward it. She expected the evidence system to preserve the object even after officials forgot the woman. Emile returned the suitcase to storage when Lena began working at the archive. He had believed Lena would recognize the film as constructed testimony rather than literal footage. Instead, his repeated lies had made her suspect every true image as well. Lena asked why Mara had trusted her specifically. Emile said Mara followed Lena's career from a distance and read an article she wrote about unidentified victims. Lena had argued that an archive should preserve uncertainty instead of turning guesses into facts. Mara decided that someone unwilling to call Jane 17 a solved identity might understand why the survivor's name was absent. The choice had been deliberate, not accidental inheritance. Before the attacker struck him, Emil had noticed the old camera used as a weapon. Its winding lever was wrapped with white thread, a repair he had seen only once before. Oscar Vale used the same camera in room 314 because its damaged shutter exposed each frame twice. That defect created a narrow ghost image along bright edges. Lena checked the surviving strip and found that double exposure beside every missing frame. The ghost edge marked photographs taken by Vale, while clean frames came from Mara or Emil. Lena separated the sequences by that flaw. Vale had filmed the woman at the station, hotel, and service road. Mara filmed the clinic departure and the later reconstruction. The two cameras had been edited together, so the survivor could show where Vale watched her and where she acted beyond his control. One clean frame showed Mara placing something inside the stopped clock, later moved from Meridian Station to the Bellwether lobby. Lena left Emil under guard and returned to the abandoned hotel. Behind the clock face, fixed at 10:23, she found a metal cartridge, no longer than her finger. It contained a fifth contact strip and a note in Mara's handwriting. A name can be stolen. A sequence is harder to counterfeit. The fifth strip showed the nameless woman 12 years after the fire, carrying the red suitcase into the Northbridge Archive loading bay. Mara walked beside her. In the final image, Oscar Vale stood across the street with the repaired camera raised to his face. He had found her again, yet he did not approach. The photograph proved he knew she survived, and that the later film had been created under continuing threat. Another frame captured Vale opening a ledger on the hood of his car. The page displayed two entries under Evelyn Rowe, each assigned to a different photograph. One portrait belonged to the survivor. The other showed the woman later found burned on the service road. Mara's note identified the second courier as Ruth Calder, a missing hotel employee whose disappearance had been dismissed as voluntary travel. Lena located Ruth's employment file in the hotel maintenance box. Her wrist scar, dental treatment, and measurements matched the medical records planted in the red suitcase. Vale had not selected an unknown corpse after the death. He had prepared Ruth to become Evelyn before she died. When the survivor rebelled, he used Ruth's body and their shared identity to erase one woman while framing the disappearance of the other. The truth simplified the substitution. Ruth had been promised travel papers and regular work. Instead, Vale copied her history, photographed her in the ring, and made her replace the courier he feared losing. After Ruth died during the confrontation's aftermath, he burned the body and arranged the suitcase records to identify it as Evelyn. Mara discovered the switch, then declared the survivor dead before Vale could assign her a third stolen life. Mara's note did not accuse Vale of intentionally killing Ruth. It stated that he abandoned her after she suffered a head injury while trying to flee the service road. He chose the identity scheme over medical help, then used the fire to protect it. That decision made him responsible for her death, even without a planned murder. It also explained why he had spent decades retrieving photographs rather than silencing every witness. The fifth strip contained evidence Mara could not place in a report. Vale photographing Ruth's injury instead of helping her. His repaired camera produced the same doubled edge around her raised hand and the suitcase handle. The image had been captured by the fixed camera in room 314 after Vale developed the roll there. Mara photographed his contact sheet before he destroyed it. The decisive proof survived as a copy of a copy. Beneath Mara's note, Lena found a diagram of the red suitcase handle. The original identity ledger had been reduced onto microfilm and sealed inside the hollow grip. The wigs, coins, and false medical records were distractions designed to survive ordinary inspection. Vale had stolen the suitcase because the handle contained every payment and assignment, including Ruth's transfer into Evelyn's identity. The attacker had taken the evidence he feared, not merely the survivor's missing name. Lena now understood why Mara's inactive account opened the scanned letter. Before her death, Mara had created an automatic archive rule that copied any document containing the Evelyn alias into a protected case folder. Vale had learned of the rule through hotel records seized during the first investigation and watched for its activation. The upload had not revealed the name to him. It had announced that Lena had reached the envelope. The protected folder still existed on an offline terminal. It contained Mara's final statement, recorded 6 months before her death. She confirmed the survivor had returned only once, helped construct the film, and refused to testify while Vale possessed her real name. Mara accepted that choice because a public trial would force the survivor to prove every false identity in open court, exposing the family and life she had built after Northbridge. Mara also confessed why she left the official case unresolved. She could identify Ruth Calder or protect the survivor, but the evidence then could not accomplish both. Naming Ruth would reveal that Evelyn lived, giving Vale a trail. Declaring the survivor dead kept her safe, but buried Ruth under the wrong history. Mara chose the living woman and spent the rest of her career creating evidence strong enough to repair the dead one. The statement ended with a warning about Emil. Mara believed he would protect the survivor's name, even if doing so preserved Vale's control. She therefore split the truth between the film, the clock, the suitcase handle, and Lena's judgment. No single object could solve the case. Together, they established Ruth's identity and Vale's conduct, without requiring the survivor to appear. The real name inside the envelope was emotionally powerful, but legally unnecessary. Lena called the police and reported that Oscar Vale had stolen evidence linked to Ruth Calder's death. She did not mention the cut name or the survivor's later life. Officers searched Vale's registered addresses and found them empty. The bellwether caretaker then reported water dripping beneath the locked door of room 314. The stolen suitcase had been soaked during the archive attack, and its trail led back to the studio, where the identity system began. At the hospital, Emil begged Lena not to enter the hotel. He said Vale would destroy the microfilm before allowing Ruth's name to replace Evelyn's. Lena answered that the fifth strip already supplied enough evidence to reopen the death, but the ledger could show how many other identities had been stolen. Emil warned that recovering it might expose the survivor's chosen name. For the first time, Lena accepted that both outcomes could be true. Lena reached the bellwether as police sealed the lobby, but the hidden panel in room 314 stood open, and the studio lights were burning. On the stopped clock, the minute hand had been moved from 10:23 to 10:18, restoring the false time shown in the first film. From behind the wall came one camera click, followed by Vale's voice. "Bring me Mara's fifth strip, or Evelyn dies a second time." Lena entered the hidden studio, carrying a duplicate of Mara's fifth strip while the original remained with police. Vale stood beside the fixed camera, older than his photographs, but recognizable by the white thread around its winding lever. The red suitcase lay open on the table. Its hollow handle had been removed. Vale held the metal tube over a tray of burning developer fluid, ready to destroy the microfilm inside. He demanded the strip, because it showed him photographing Ruth after her injury. Lena said copies already existed, but Vale answered that copies without sequence could be dismissed as reconstruction. He needed the original order erased. Ruth assigned to Evelyn, Ruth abandoned on the road, and the survivor declared dead. He had spent decades removing links, not witnesses, because broken sequences made every surviving image look uncertain. Vale admitted he built identities for people who wanted to disappear, then kept control by owning the histories they used. The survivor had been his most reliable courier, until she learned Evelyn Rowe had been copied onto Ruth. When Ruth tried to flee with the ledger, Vale followed her to the service road. She struck her head during the struggle. He photographed the injury, expecting fear to make her obey. Ruth stopped responding before Vale decided whether to call for help. He chose the suitcase instead. He placed Evelyn's records with her body, burned the scene, and expected the survivor to become permanently unusable. Mara disrupted that plan by declaring the living woman dead first. Vale had lost the courier, the ledger, and control of the identity, but he still possessed enough photographs to threaten anyone who restored the sequence. Lena kept him talking while studying the studio. The fixed camera still faced the table, and the mechanical trigger behind the wall remained connected to the panel. Water from the archive attack had stained the suitcase, but one corner stayed dry, where the handle had been removed. Vale's old camera rested within reach, its damaged shutter the source of every doubled edge, remained the physical link between him and the decisive images. Vale offered a trade. Lena would surrender Mara's fifth strip and every archive copy, and he would give her the microfilm frame naming Ruth Calder. The rest of the ledger would remain with him, including the survivor's later identity and dozens of stolen histories. Lena could solve the nameless body immediately, but only by allowing Vale to preserve the system that had made Ruth disposable. Lena refused to erase the fifth strip. Vale lowered the metal tube toward the flame and said Ruth would remain Jane 17 forever. Lena then placed her duplicate strip beneath the enlarger and switched on the lamp. Vale stepped forward to seize it. The hidden panel shifted under his weight, triggering the fixed camera. Its shutter clicked once, capturing him beside the open suitcase, the removed handle, and the burning tray. The new photograph could prove possession and destruction of evidence, but not Ruth's death. Vale understood that and smiled. He crushed the duplicate strip beneath his shoe, then opened the metal tube. A narrow coil of microfilm slid onto the table. Lena saw rows of names and photographs, including the older survivor beside an address. One image could restore Ruth. The same image could guide Vale back to the woman who escaped him. Outside the wall, police struck the locked door. Vale told Lena to choose quickly. She could pull the Ruth frame free and let officers seize the remaining ledger, exposing the survivor's chosen identity in court. Or she could destroy the entire coil, protect the survivor, and rely on Mara's fifth strip to identify Ruth through employment records, scars, and Vale's camera defect. The second path would leave many stolen histories unresolved. Lena remembered her argument that archives should preserve uncertainty rather than turn guesses into facts. She also remembered Ruth's grave under a number and Emil bleeding beside the projector. The ledger promised complete answers, but its completeness belonged to Vale. Every name inside had been gathered as leverage. Preserving it without protecting the living would repeat his method under a legal seal. Lena chose the evidence that proved harm without surrendering every victim. She swept the microfilm into the burning tray. Vale lunged, and Lena drove the red suitcase between them. The tray overturned across the wet floor, spreading flame through the chemical residue. Vale grabbed the metal tube and struck her shoulder. Lena held onto the suitcase while the fixed camera clicked again and again. Each mechanical exposure, recording his attempt to recover the ledger he claimed had never existed. Smoke filled the studio as police forced the panel open. Vale reached the service door with his camera, but Lena threw the suitcase handle across his path. He stumbled, and the repaired camera shattered against the wall. The white-threaded lever broke away beside the burning microfilm. Officers pulled Vale from the floor, while Lena used her coat to smother the last flames. Nothing readable remained on the coil. The loss was immediate and irreversible. The ledger could no longer reveal the survivor's chosen name, the other clients, or the full number of histories Vale had sold. Lena had destroyed evidence knowingly, and she understood that her career might end with the case. Yet the original fifth strip remained outside, along with the newly exposed photographs from the fixed camera and Vale's broken camera, bearing the defect visible in the older images. In the lobby, Emil arrived from the hospital, against medical advice. He saw the empty metal tube and understood what Lena had done. He did not thank her. He asked whether Ruth's name had survived. Lena showed him Mara's fifth strip, the hotel employment file, and the photograph of Vale choosing his camera over Ruth's injured body. Ruth could now be identified, without forcing the survivor back into Evelyn's borrowed life. Vale denied the confession once lawyers arrived, claiming Lena had invented his words during the fire. The images answered more clearly. His repaired camera matched the doubled edge on the station, hotel, and service road frames. The fixed camera recorded him holding the ledger tube and trying to retrieve it from the flames. Mara's strip preserved the sequence he had spent decades breaking. His behavior completed what his words could not. Investigators reconstructed the final night without relying on the destroyed ledger. Ruth had entered the identity system through the bellwether. She discovered she was replacing another woman and tried to leave with evidence. Vale pursued her, refused medical help after her injury, and staged the fire using Evelyn's prepared records. Mara recognized the substitution, hid the survivor, and built a delayed case around photographs Vale could not fully erase. The central mystery was finally divided into two truthful answers. The body buried as Jane 17 was Ruth Calder. The woman filmed at Meridian Station survived the fire and later helped preserve the evidence. Her birth name remained unknown by choice, not because the investigation had failed. Lena requested that every report distinguish Ruth, Evelyn, and the survivor, instead of forcing all three into one convenient identity. Prosecutors warned that destroying the microfilm weakened every case beyond Ruth's. Lena accepted responsibility and surrendered her archive credentials. The decision cost her the work that had defined her adult life. It also ended any legal path to discovering the survivor's chosen name. Emil could no longer hope that one complete ledger would tell him where she had gone, or whether she had ever intended to return. Emil blamed Lena for several minutes, then admitted he would have chosen differently. He would have exposed the survivor to recover the name, because uncertainty had consumed more of his life than fear ever did. Lena answered that love did not make possession kinder. The woman had left him a sequence, not an address. Protecting her choice meant accepting that the final part of her story did not belong to him. Before police sealed the studio, Lena recovered the silver ring from beneath the enlarger. Vale had carried it inside the stolen suitcase, perhaps believing it still controlled Evelyn's identity. The gray wax remained lodged in its inner groove. Ruth's employment photograph showed the same ring on her hand, while the survivor's later frames showed it raised toward the camera. One object had marked both imprisonment and warning. Lena gave the ring to Ruth's remaining case file rather than to Emil. It was the only decision that made the evidence honest. The survivor had used it, but Ruth had died wearing the identity it represented. Emil objected, then withdrew his hand before touching it. For the first time, he allowed an object connected to the woman he loved to belong to someone else's story. As Vale was taken from the bellwether, the stopped lobby clock restarted without repair. Its minute hand moved from 10:18 to 10:23, correcting the false time that had opened the investigation. Lena watched it settle while officers carried Ruth's file into daylight. The mechanism of the crime, the substitution, and Vale's role were now clear. What remained was the cost of giving one woman her name without taking another woman's freedom. 3 days after the bellwether fire, Lena sat before an internal review board and described why she burned the microfilm. She did not call the act accidental or necessary. She said she had chosen to destroy evidence that exposed living victims in order to preserve evidence that proved Ruth Calder had been abandoned. The board suspended her permanently from archive work, while prosecutors decided whether to charge her. Emil recovered with 6 stitches, a fractured collarbone, and a tremor in his right hand that worsened whenever a camera clicked. He returned the gray wax envelope's empty shell to police, though the cut signature was gone. For years, he had treated the missing name as the center of the case. Now he understood that the absence had been created by the survivor herself and guarded by everyone who loved her badly. Vale remained in custody on charges connected to evidence tampering, fraud, unlawful confinement, and Ruth's death. The murder charge prosecutors first considered could not be supported without proving intent. Instead, the fifth strip, the repaired camera, and his actions in room 314 established that he left Ruth injured, staged the fire, and maintained the false identity afterward. The case against him was narrower than the public wanted, but stronger than his denials. Police reopened the service road grave under Ruth Calder's name. Her surviving cousin identified a childhood fracture that had never appeared in Vale's copied medical file. DNA testing confirmed the relationship. The result did not identify the woman who survived, nor did investigators seek to compare her later records. For the first time, the body, the suitcase, and the alias were separated into 3 distinct histories. The red suitcase was recovered from the studio, with its handle broken and its lining burned. Investigators preserved it as evidence, but removed the wigs, coins, and false x-rays from Ruth's personal file. Those objects belonged to Vale's system, not to her life. A faded employee card from the bellwether became Ruth's primary photograph, showing her smiling without the ring and wearing her own name above her heart. The fixed camera produced 6 usable photographs from the confrontation. They showed Vale opening the suitcase, holding the metal tube, striking Lena, and reaching into the flames after police entered. Each image lacked the doubled edge because the camera was not his repaired model. Together with the old ghosted frames, the difference made the sequence clear. One camera documented control, while another preserved the moment that control failed. Mara Venn's hidden report was admitted into the reopened inquiry, but officials did not excuse her choices. She had protected a survivor, concealed Ruth's identity, altered evidence routes, and trusted a delayed archive trail over public accountability. The final finding called her actions understandable and unlawful. Lena thought the judgment was honest. Mara had saved one life, failed another woman, and spent the rest of hers trying to repair both truths. At the first hearing, Vale looked toward Emile and called the survivor Evelyn one final time. Emile did not react. Lena watched the name lose its power in the room. It no longer summoned a courier, a dead woman, or a secret lover. It was exposed as a tool Vale used whenever he wanted another person's history to answer him. Investigators reconstructed the first confirmed sequence from hotel records and surviving film. Vale recruited Ruth from the Bellwether staff after learning she needed travel documents. He photographed her, copied her dental history, and taught her the gestures and signatures attached to Evelyn Rowe. Ruth believed she was receiving a temporary identity. She did not know Vale had assigned that same identity to another woman for years. The survivor discovered the duplication when Ruth's portrait appeared beside her own in the ledger. She feared Vale planned to make one woman responsible for the other's movements, then erase whichever became inconvenient. She contacted Mara and asked Emil to help remove the ledger from room 314. Their plan failed when Vale recovered the book, recognized the silver ring, and used the name Evelyn to signal that he still controlled the identity. Ruth found the ledger later and tried to leave through the service road with the red suitcase. Vale followed and confronted her. During the struggle, she fell against the roadside barrier and suffered the head injury visible in his photographs. She remained alive long enough to require medical help. Vale chose to preserve the ledger and the false identity instead, then used fire and planted records to make Ruth appear to be the other woman. Mara reached the road after Vale left and recognized that the burned body did not match the woman she had been protecting. At the clinic, she found the survivor injured but alive from the earlier hotel confrontation. She used Vale's own false records to declare the survivor dead, preventing him from tracing her next identity. That decision saved the survivor while trapping Ruth beneath the official name, Jane 17. Emil carried the red suitcase because the original escape plan required him to separate the ledger from the woman. His failure was not causing Ruth's death, as he had feared, but ignoring the warning at Meridian Station and later withholding Mara's envelope. Each act came from love mixed with possession. He wanted to save the woman without accepting that she might choose a future in which he had no place. The silent film was assembled 12 years later by Mara, Emile, and the survivor. Authentic images showed where Vale had watched her. Clean images showed where she regained control. Missing frames marked abandoned routes, while the repeated warning identified an exposed alias. The reconstructed reel never claimed to show one continuous journey. It was a delayed testimony designed to survive after documents, witnesses, and official memories had failed. The decisive evidence was not the missing name. It was the sequence joining Ruth's employment record, Vale's double-edged photographs, Mara's fifth strip, the fixed camera, and the recovered ring. Each item answered a limited question. Together they showed who Ruth was, how Vale reassigned her identity, why he abandoned her, and how he spent decades breaking the order of the images that could prove it. One question remained intentionally unanswered: the survivor's real name. Police recorded her as an unidentified protected witness who had chosen not to return. That description was incomplete, but not false. Lena insisted the final report state that investigators possessed no evidence she committed a crime or caused Ruth's death. Her anonymity was not treated as suspicious behavior. It was recognized as the last boundary she had successfully kept. Ruth's reburial took place beneath a plain stone, bearing her full name and the years of her short life. Lena stood beside Emile and the cousin who had provided DNA, No one mentioned Evelyn Rowe during the service. The silver ring remained in evidence, but Ruth's employee card was placed inside the coffin. It was the only surviving image in which Vale had not arranged her face, clothing, or history. After the mourners left, Emil apologized to Ruth aloud. He said he had spent 27 years grieving the wrong woman, because grief with a secret had felt more meaningful than responsibility without one. He admitted that he never asked who the bird woman might be. Lena did not comfort him. She remained beside him until he finished, allowing the apology to belong to Ruth, rather than to his need for forgiveness. Emil later gave Lena the photograph from the envelope, the one showing him and the survivor beside the station clock. He had kept a copy hidden from Mara. Lena expected another confession, but he asked her to destroy it. The picture proved only that they had once been happy. Keeping it as evidence would turn a private moment into another object used to pursue the woman after she had chosen to disappear. Lena returned the photograph instead. She told Emil that destroying every trace was not the same as respecting a choice. He could keep one memory without using it as a map. Emil placed the photograph in an ordinary drawer, not the locked workshop. The change was small, but it ended the ritual of treating love as classified material and uncertainty as a punishment someone else had imposed on him. Without archive access, Lena began writing a public account centered on Ruth rather than the nameless survivor. She described the mechanisms of copied histories, the failures of the investigation, and the limits of the evidence. She omitted the survivor's possible addresses and the cut space where her name had been. For the first time, Lena understood that an honest record could include a deliberate silence without becoming a lie. The camera shutter remained difficult for Emil. At Ruth's reburial, a press photographer had raised his lens too quickly, and Emil nearly left. Lena asked the photographer to lower it until the family was ready. When the shutter finally clicked, Emil stayed beside the grave. The sound no longer meant that Vale controlled the next image. It marked a photograph taken with permission, after Ruth's name had been spoken correctly. Months later, Emil told Lena he had stopped waiting for the survivor to return. He did not claim to have stopped loving her. He simply removed the timetable he had kept beside his bed, where 10:23 had been circled for decades. The station clock's corrected time had once represented his failure. Now it reminded him that a false record could be repaired without restoring everything that had been lost. Vale was convicted of fraud, evidence tampering, unlawful restraint, and causing Ruth's death through deliberate abandonment. The sentence could not account for every stolen history because the ledger was gone. Several former clients came forward after seeing Ruth's case, but others remained silent. The court acknowledged that the destroyed microfilm limited further prosecutions. Lena accepted that consequence, without pretending her choice had protected everyone. The Northbridge Archive changed its rules for unidentified remains. Comparison records could no longer come from a single item of luggage without independent verification. Altered evidence numbers triggered automatic review, and inactive accounts could not access new uploads. Mara's hidden boxes were cataloged openly, including the report that criticized her own conduct. The reforms did not redeem the past, but they made repeating the same convenient certainty more difficult. Ruth's case file was reduced from 7 conflicting aliases to 1 verified name, and a separate appendix documenting Vale's identity system. The words Jane 17 remained only as a historical reference. Evelyn Rowe was classified as a manufactured identity used against at least 2 women. The survivor was described without a photograph. Her absence from the final file no longer erased Ruth. It prevented the archive from confusing them again. Lena lost her position, but not her connection to the work. Families of unidentified victims began sending her copies of rejected records and contradictory reports. She helped them organize questions for official investigators, careful never to promise a name where evidence supported only doubt. On her desk, she kept no relic from the bellwether, only Ruth's reburial notice and a written rule: preserve the person before preserving the mystery. 1 year after the conviction, Emil received an unmarked envelope bearing no stamp or return address. Inside was a recent photograph of Ruth's grave after fresh snow. Emil and Lena appeared in the distance, leaving together. The image had been taken from behind the cemetery wall. Its bright edges were clean, with none of Vale's doubled ghosting. On the back, 3 words had been written in gray ink. The handwriting did not match Mara, Emil, Vale, or any document attributed to Ruth. The message read, "Do not call me Evelyn." No demand followed it. There was no address, threat, or request for contact. The photograph revealed only that someone understood the warning, possessed a camera, and knew when Ruth had finally been buried under her own name. Lena submitted the photograph for testing. The paper was recent, the ink commercially available, and the image free of manipulation. Cemetery footage showed no clear photographer, because snow had obscured the camera facing the wall. Investigators classified the envelope as an unverified communication and returned a copy to Emil. He placed it beside the old station photograph without searching for fingerprints, routes, or hidden codes. The message could have been gratitude, a warning, or proof that the survivor was still protecting the boundary she created. Yet one question remained. Had she watched from outside the cemetery to make certain Ruth received the name denied to her for 27 years? Or had someone else inherited both the phrase and the duty behind it? Neither Lena nor Emil answered. They left the new photograph face up beside the picture taken at Meridian Station. In one image, the woman had been trapped inside a borrowed name. In the other, someone stood beyond the cemetery wall after Ruth was finally free of it.